Let's compare the 5 melee damage dealers of Final Fantasy XIV. If you already know you want to main a melee damage dealer, or melee DPS as it is more commonly called, then this might serve to help you choose, or alternatively teach you what you don't want. Or maybe you just want to hear about the pros and cons of each of these jobs, combined with a bit of comedy, in which case you have also come to the right place. Please keep in mind that this video may be slightly opinionated, especially in the ratings shown for each job. So, if you feel that I missed something or that you disagree, I would love to hear about it, or about your favorite melee DPS in the comments. Now then, let's start with the most literal melee job you can imagine, the fist-punching monk. The first of the striking type, combining punching and kicking martial arts with chakra and fantasy monk aesthetics, the monk has very few surprises in its toolkit. The basics of the monk rotation revolves around 3 so-called forms. Imagine that the monk knows 3 attacks to perform from a specific martial stance, and all 3 attacks lead to a new stance that the monk also knows 3 attacks to continue with. This gives rise to the 3 stances, namely Opo, a type of monkey, Raptor, a strange type of 2-legged bird-like yet raptor-like creature, and Quirl, an electric sort of feline species. In combat, this means that, like most physical jobs, you go through 1-2-3 combos. However, the monk uniquely can choose whichever step 1, followed by whichever step 2, and then finished by whichever step 3. When optimized, this leads to 4 common combos in a single target scenario, which is used in a certain sequence of 6 combos before it loops. For area of effect, however, you simply use 1 combo sequence repeatedly. Due to how the monk's burst sequence is connected to the weapon skill combos, being directly tied to usage of perfect balance, the main optimization of the monk relies on planning your combos to be in a certain state as reliably as possible when your cooldowns are ready. Due to Brotherhood's 15-second duration, which does line up with most raid cooldowns, your aim is to try and fit 2 masterful blitzes within this 15-second window as you master the job. Simply put, if you are playing around just your own situation, you can just use Brotherhood when your combo sequence lines up. But once you introduce other players to the situation, typically only necessary in a Savage Raid context, you want to use Brotherhood precisely on cooldown if you can, which puts a lot more weight on you being capable of either just being in the correct point in your combos at that time, or alternatively know multiple ways to line up your combos to match up well enough regardless. This is what makes the difficulty of mastering the monk so incredibly high, as most other jobs can interrupt their normal weapon skill combos to perform their burst whenever they like. But monk just cannot do that, a trait that is somehow familiar with black mages in some ways. This means that you have a lot of opportunity to grow as a monk player, finding lots of ways to optimize your rotation and bursts. In terms of defense, monk both has the most readily available and strongest defensive cooldown amongst the melee jobs with Riddle of Earth, and also has a raid-wide healing buff in Mantra. The downside to monk is that while the other melee are less punished by losing uptime on fights due to having ranged attacks, the monk does not have this. However, this is a very mild weakness as fights in the game tend to offer plenty of opportunities to stick to your target. If you're really trying to optimize your monk gameplay, you may run into the interesting aspect that the monk's standard oGCD timer is so fast that it is common knowledge in the monk community that you need certain skill speed to avoid DPS loss due to frame rates, which is something so specific that it is something I have never observed in any other job optimization in any significant way. You know it is getting technical when you're optimizing around your frame rate. Next up is the samurai, also of the striking type. With the aesthetic and the gameplay of a disciplined samurai fighting style, not unlikely to take inspiration from Kendo, combined with the fantasy samurai's combination of instantaneous single slashes of death and hundreds of slashes in a fraction of a second, the samurai is very much in tune with what you would expect from such a job. The basic rotation of the samurai involves cycling through 3 different combo sequences, 2 of which are 3-step and 1 that is 2-step, to both make sure a damage buff and a speed buff is kept running. but also to collect Zen resources to access specific finishing moves, so-called EI jutsus. Even at the most basic level, the samurai can optimize the use of the Higanbana EI jutsu specifically by performing it with the Yukikase related Zen sets, saving time. Starting samurais may not care much for when they use their big attacks, potentially sprinkling them out throughout a fight since, after all, the samurai itself has no ability to boost its damage output temporarily, so it does not matter. This makes the basic rotation about making the most of your combo sequences, keeping up Higanbana and getting as many Midare Setsugekas as you can, while filling in with all your sudden death-like slash cooldowns. As you improve, however, you notice that while you cannot boost your own damage temporarily, a lot of other jobs can boost your damage in addition to their own. This first leads the optimization to make sure all of those long cooldowns are spent while boosted by the rest of your raid. Now, this can be extremely difficult to match up since Tsubame Gaishi and Make Your Shisui tie some of your burst to your oGCD, like with the monk. This tends to lead aspiring future masters of the samurai to practice the looping rotation, which then leads to mastering fillers, which then finally teaches what Hagakure is and why it is important, as it helps you to line up that Midare Setsugeka as raid cooldowns come up. However, this means that the biggest complexity in the samurai's burst comes from the planning and preparation to make it happen, rather than the act of performing it in the first place, although after all that preparation it is not uncommon to accidentally fumble the whole thing. In terms of defense, the samurai has only the third eye, which when used well can be used to block damage on most raid-wide attacks. However, the power of this cooldown is significantly weaker than the monk's Riddle of Earth. And aside from this, the samurai only has access to the universal defensive toolkit of the melee jobs. While the samurai itself brings literally nothing to the table in terms of raid support, it does have one raid support functionality. With the power of friendship and anime, the samurai is capable of translating other raid cooldowns into the biggest damage number amongst all jobs, making the supporting functionality of the selfish DPS samurai that it makes your other raid cooldowns better simply by existing. Next, let's drag ourselves over to the Dragoon, the first of the maiming type, a very Final Fantasy specific type of job, complete with dragon-inspired attacks and jumps. A lot of jumps. The maiming type wears more platy armor compared to the striking type, which happens to mean that their base defenses are higher in comparison, almost like a pseudo-tank, but not really. The first unique aspect of the Dragoons Rotation at its basic level is that instead of 3-step combos, it has 5-step combos. However, due to the length of its combos, combined with the duration of the buffs and debuffs applied by them, the two 5-step combos tend to merge together into a single 10-step combo sequence. Aside from Life Surge, all of the Dragoon's cooldowns can be dealt with separately from the basic combo sequence, which means that the Dragoon's burst is a lot more a matter of simply doing it right and then fitting Life Surge where it matches with your rotation. The first thing aspiring Dragoons will run into is that it turns out that using your gap closing jumps like Spine Shatter Dive to actually gap close is considered wasteful, and that you will often use Elusive Jump and Sprint as your only gap closing options, to save the other damaging ones for, well, damage. The second thing is related to Geiskogul and Mirage Dive, where the logical move would be to use Geiskogul after Mirage Dive to get into Life of the Dragon, your big burst mode, as quickly as possible. However, once you start to optimize, it turns out you want to flip their order such that you intentionally delay it by 30 seconds. Similarly to Samurai, you do this to move your Life of the Dragon to every whole minute rather than the 30 seconds between. This is more intuitive for a Dragoon compared to a Samurai, however, as the Dragoon has not one, not two, but 3 buffs, one of which is a raid cooldown and one of which is a buff for you and a friend, teaching you that fitting as many of your attacks in these buffs as possible is obviously what you would want to do. Due to the sheer amount of buttons needed to be pressed in your burst, as well as the fact that all of your jumps take slightly longer to perform than normal abilities, Stardiver especially, makes the main complexity of the Dragoon related to managing to fit all of that in the burst window. The great news are that because of the raid buffs you bring, a significant portion of the damage you bring to the table is related to boosting your friends as well. Samurai will love you. In terms of defense, the Dragoon quite literally has nothing. While Life Surge heals for a portion of the damage you do with it, you will be using Life Surge for damage purposes, and so typically you will not be using it when you need the healing. This leaves the Dragoon at the mercy of the melee job role actions and your party options as a whole. Now that I have commented on the Dragoon, well knowing that the job is chosen to be having a major rework come next expansion, watch the dev team choose to rework the job in 6.3 and make me look like a goof. I'm daring you to do it. I know you removed chitin at that exact moment just to mess with me. I know. Anyway, let's move on to Reaper, the other maiming type. A very unique aesthetic, combining death from the inspiration of a Grim Reaper, combined with void magic through your avatar. The combat aesthetic is focused on extremely flashy and intense slashes for the general rotation, combined with quick extra strikes from the avatar, which combine when you merge with your avatar, leading to a much more aggressive and speedy rotation temporarily. The basic rotation of the Reaper starts by watching the Death's Design debuff and ensuring this is always on your target to maximize your damage. This is then followed by making use of your cooldowns, with one part generating resources, and the other more effectively spending them than the basic tools. Spending the first resource Soul Gauge then leads into a forced combo that can be a 1-step or 2-step when spent with Gluttony specifically. And once every cooldown is spent, the Reaper makes use of the simple 1-2-3 combo that just slowly generates Soul Gauge, while doing an acceptable amount of damage. The key difference here being that while other melee jobs gain some sort of major benefit from their combos, the Reaper's combo is quite literally the "I'm waiting for better buttons to be available" combo. Once enough Shroud Gauge is produced, you can then jump into Enshroud, which increases the pace of the job, similar to a machinist, temporarily by both employing faster GCD attacks and adding extra oGCD attacks, and finishing with the explosive Communio. Due to how the Reaper's rotation is a lot about using cooldowns as they come up and just waiting in between, it feels similar to a warrior's priority sequence rather than a real rigid rotation. The first optimization most Reapers will recognize is making the most of the Harvest Moon attack, since you get very limited uses of this attack throughout a fight. Additionally, while all melee jobs have some sort of mobility option, the Reaper's ingress and egress leaving a portal to return to means that an additional optimization for the Reaper is related to choosing where to teleport from, such that you get the most value out of returning to the spot after danger. While the opener of the Reaper appears to be very intuitive, playing with an optimized Savage Raid team offers two different openers. Because one optimizes around getting the most out of all of your cooldowns as quickly as possible, Gluttony first, and the other prioritizes getting Enshroud out as fast as possible, Enshroud first. Both of them also gives rise to a very strict skill speed requirement to perfectly optimize due to there being a wait time between using Arcane Circle and enabling Plentiful Harvest. And finally, the intuitive way to perform the burst every 2 minutes is significantly different from the optimal way to perform it, incorporating 2 Death's Design applications to play for time to be able to chain 2 Enshrouds in quick succession, which can also result in drifting Gluttony, at least the first time. However, the difficulty of performing this optimization is heavily eased by the fact that Reaper is one of the slowest and most mellow jobs in the game. You have plenty of time to observe everything you need and perform everything you need to. In terms of defense, Reaper also uses the stronger defense maiming equipment like Dragoon, but also has Arcane Crest, which as a single button is possibly one of the best defensive cooldowns for your raid, allowing you to support your healers in healing the party back up after raid-wide damage. The relatively short cooldown also enables the use of Arcane Crest very regularly. This makes Reaper an excellent job to have in a team, especially when learning a fight. Additionally, while not a defensive tool in its own right, Harp is the strongest of all the spammable ranged attacks amongst the melee jobs, making Reaper the best job to be if you are the type of player to be very careful with telegraphs when learning fights. And finally, dashing out of the shadows we have Ninja, the only scouting type melee job. Ninja uniquely also depends on ranged physical job accessories due to using dexterity instead of strength. The ninja combines covert stealth attacks with classic anime tropes like summoning magic through special hand signs called mudras. It should be stated that these hand signs are also a part of actual real-life ninja history, although I only know the bare basics of this. A ninja is expected to get in, get the deed done, and get out, quick and easy, which is absolutely represented in its burst sequences. The basics of the job start at a very high level of difficulty since you need to memorize several sequences of mudras to even be able to play the job at a base level. However, once this is learned, you will quickly notice that nearly every single cooldown and tool of the ninja outside of their 1-2-3 combos all line up to be used together every minute, exactly as you would expect a ninja to do. This makes the difficult part about learning Ninja's burst that the job goes very fast when it goes. And knowing how to perform the full burst, which includes a lot of actions in the 15-second time frame allotted by trick attack, done in the correct order. The fact that the ninja's rotation as a whole is so deeply intertwined with its burst sequence removes some complexity from the job by simply having very little outside of it to do. For example, the ninja does not need to care at all about where it is in its 1-2-3 combo for its burst, compared to monk and samurai. And while you want to make sure Futon's duration is high when you go into your burst, this happens almost completely naturally at all times, which removes the worry of keeping up your maintenance effects from your burst, compared to Reaper, who actually uses it during its burst intentionally. And since your 1-2-3 combo has little to no direct impact on your burst, you even remove the worry of lining that up, compared to Dragoon's Life Surge. The only concern is considering stockpiling some Ninki gauge for your burst, but overall, you generate a lot of Ninki gauge as you go, so this may also be something you can safely ignore without a massive loss. Shockingly, Mug's longer duration and more universally powerful 5% damage increase makes the ninja's raid buff better than both the monk and dragoon raid buffs. On the other hand, the ninja's defensive tools are limited to just Shadeshift and the roll actions. While Shadeshift is excellent in its own right, nearly as strong as the Blackest Night, the massive cooldown and no side effect ultimately makes it far worse than the other melees. Well, except for Dragoon of course. An interesting synergy is that the ninja brings the power of friendship and anime, and the samurai lives off of it, and they are both possibly the most anime jobs in Final Fantasy XIV. Isn't that something? To round up this comparison, each melee of course brings something unique to the table. In terms of performance, they are all very close to each other, so the main reason to choose one melee over another is either in their aesthetics, their playstyle, or whether they are easy or difficult to play, depending on your preference. For a new player wanting something easy, I would recommend starting with Dragoon and then transitioning into Reaper once you reach level 70, as the difficulty of Dragoon really starts to spike at that point. This of course also implies that any player wanting something easy, I would recommend Reaper for. If you want something with a strict rotation, I recommend Samurai, and then, if you want something with a super complex burst combo, you have the choices between Ninja, Dragoon, and Monk, in order of how much your combo state plays a factor, which can make it more difficult. And that leads us to the ending of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this comparison or even found it funny or interesting, please consider leaving a like. You can also subscribe or burst combo the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you really want to support me making these videos, you can also become a member of the channel, which helps me immensely with being able to dedicate all my time to making content. And finally, make sure to remember to let me know in the comments which melee DPS is your favorite. Fun fact, before 6.1, Samurai had an action called Hisat's Kaiten, which at the cost of 20 Kenki boosted the potency of their next weapon skill by 50%. This exclusively was used on Iaijutsus and Oginamikiri of course. which meant that the blade flourish animation of Kaiten was almost seen as an integral part of these attacks. Unfortunately, this was removed as it added unnecessary complexity to the job, I guess. Many samurais still mourn the loss of Kaiten to this day,